Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Lenny Warren. I have my own company called RMI Solutions. I am a pimp in the remedy world. I pimp myself out to, well, I shouldn't say pimp. I would say I'm a prostitute, if you want to call it that. I kind of contract myself out to anybody that will hire me on and go from there. And I do it through whatever product partner that's out there and so forth. And one of the situations I was encountered was to a request was for me to join onto the United States Army team to do an engagement for them. And in order to do that, I had to have Security Plus certification. So I went through a lot of process in this. For those of you that have had it, you probably understand my pain of going through and getting the Security Plus. But when I said I would join the contract and then they tossed this out to me, I'm like, well, okay, I can do it. It's just another test. I've worked in the security world for so many years in the military and even afterwards that I've taken all the classes and everything else. And then they tossed this on and I'm like, all right, well, I could do it. I think it's a simple test, a simple thing to do. I thought I could schedule it really easily. Nope, you have to go and find registration for it. And then in some cases you had to find a location or you could do it at home. I mean, it was a long drawn out process. So it kind of gave me enough time to even study for it. And I did it over the holidays. So of course I ruined my Christmas and New Year's holiday dealing with studying once again, which I've never had a holiday in the last, I don't know, 40 years of a break from it anyway. So I asked Bob if he wanted me to do something on this. For those of you that are looking at needing to get your Security Plus certification, or you're looking to join on with a government contract, in order to work with the administration side of the house to do any installs and things like that, they generally require you to have Security Plus certification at this point. So when I went through that whole process, I found the right companies to register with, to pay the money to, found several people that helped me with getting documentation support and things like that. And then I ended up taking the class or test at home. And that was another fiasco in that capacity as well. So for this session, I'm just going to basically walk you through what you need to do to get your Security Plus training or certification. But I would strongly recommend also that you gather as much information you can before you take the test, because it is not one of those, if you're not a network person, it's not one of those easy tests that you can take and pass. And they give you a second chance to pass or test it. But once you hit the third and fourth and so forth, then you're going to encounter having to pay for it again. And that's something I didn't want to do. Fortunately for me, I studied for 3 weeks and passed it on the first time. With the Security Plus, this is what CompTIA, which is the company I went through and did the registration. They basically, from their website, provide you with the job positions that are open when you get your Security Plus certification. And one of mine in this case is really tied to, which is not on here, which is the remedy developer. And that allows me to have some system administration, some security administration features within the realm of the government. Studying for the test itself was a challenge. I started out getting documents for SYO 501. I went through the whole process. When I went to register for the test, it said the language was Portuguese, Japanese, and simplified Chinese. And I'm like, where's English? I can't do it in these three. And then it didn't, I mean, it took me about an hour to finally find somebody to say that it's no longer available for English in SYO 501. So then I had to go to 601. 601 was launched back in November of 2020, and it is available for English, Japanese, Vietnamese, Thai, and Portuguese, while 501 is still available for those other languages that are out there. So with 601, 601 is more along the lines of cloud management, cloud networking. It also incorporates the hands-on performance exercise that you would have to do. It's not graded, but you have to do a hands-on where they ask you specific questions on How would you set this up for security purposes, for the network, for the web, for the internet, and things like that? So this is where I had to change my focus after a week of studying 501 and switch it over to 601, trying to find out what other information do I need to gather to study for. So this is where it focuses on the particular areas in question. So from CompTIA, this allows you to see the areas that you need to put your training focus on. You can research, you can search the internet to find all sorts of information about this, but there's a lot of information that's there. 501 data is valid in a way, but it's only going to answer about 30% of the questions that I had to deal with based on the material that I received and was studying on 501. And then fortunately, I was able to knock out the others by finding other materials out there that cover the architecture and design, implementation, and governance and risk and compliance type features. So just to give you a review, I put these in the slides. Bob will make sure that he sends them out to you. I'm not going to go through all this, but this basically covers the different areas that Security Plus is focusing on. For example, attacks, threats, and vulnerabilities. You're basically looking at the 7 different layers of open source interconnection chart. There was about 5 questions on my test that all focused on that particular chart itself. There are attacks, different types of attacks. I had a few questions on those. Technology and tools. I had one on the configuring of firewalls. Again, that one was not graded, but it was one of the configuration pieces. So you may want to focus for those non-network people on how would you set up a firewall? How would you set up file transfer protocols? The transmission control protocols, how would you handle those? I didn't have anything that I can recall on DNS or DNS security extensions, but I'm not saying that they do give you random questions, so you never know what it is. This is the OSI layers. It basically, there is the chart that's that you can download and look at, and they do ask questions against that chart as far as which layer would you incorporate this in. The architecture and design, this is just going into the coverage of the enterprise environments that are available. And again, as I said, most of it was focused on the cloud. And so I had to deal with cloud usage questions, security related to the SaaS area for the most part. They did ask some ITSM and change management questions, which that was relatively easy for me to deal with since I've been with the ITSM side of the house for 25 years now. But there were just a couple of them. I wish there was a lot more, but there's only a couple of questions on those. They get into implementation, operations, and incident response, and then the governance, risk, and compliance. This is coming from the CompTIA or CompTIA security website as far as how they can help you. If you wanting to study and use their study materials, which would probably give you a higher score on the test, you could do that instead of trying to research all the information yourself. They do have a training class that you can get. They do have support books that you can go out. I did a Google search and looked at all of these possible documents that you can see. And you can see the prices are varying between $30 to $250. So it all depends on what you want to spend to purchase that. You could probably go to a bookstore and find one, which I did, but I did not buy it. You could also take their training class as well. And that training class, if you go into the training class itself, that's something like $4,700 if you want that. So in the certification process, I finally found out I had to go to CompTIA. I went to their website. I then basically said, well, what's my next step? What do I need to do from here to get to Security Plus? So then I just went ahead and clicked on certifications. Certifications then brought up the Security Plus option for me to look at under the training aspect, as well as the testing aspect. So when I click on the training tab, I saw their class that I could have taken, and that class was going to be pretty extensive in that aspect. But since I was taking the test on the SYO 601 and I was going to do the test first, I wanted to get more background on what I was getting into. And in this case, it told me that I was dealing with a little bit less than what 501 was doing, but a lot more focus on the cloud aspect of it. Plus, it threw me for a loop on the performance base, but I didn't know if it was being graded on that or not being graded, but they did indicate that for this time period, the performance base is just to see how well you could do, which I don't know if I did well or not well enough, but it wasn't graded. So at least not in the overall points. The problem I had with it, though, was it was the first questions you get hit on the test. And in that, you only have 90 minutes to answer 75 questions, including these 3 performance-based scenarios. So I took about 15 minutes of the 90 minutes just dealing with those. And then it's like, oh, man, am I ever going to get enough time to finish all these others? And eventually I did. And you even had enough time to go back and look at some of the other questions that I had questions about. So if you're going to take the exam, first of all, at a testing center, you have to have a CompTIA account. You can pay for the token at CompTIA, or you can pay for it at their partnership with Pearson VUE, and look for that location at the Pearson VUE site. I looked at that initially to actually go there, and the closest one to me here in Hanover, Pennsylvania, was about an hour and a half away to schedule, and the scheduling wasn't until middle of January. So that I couldn't wait till the middle of January. So I'm like, well, there's got to be something that's better, easier for me, things like that, than to actually do it at the location. So they do allow you to take it at home. And I did this process, and this is where I said it was really of a challenge into this capacity, because they're looking at everything. So once you register with CompTIA, you register with Pearson VUE to get the test scheduled. They have all these little do's and don'ts that you have to be aware of. The first one is you have to run a test on your computer to see if it's compatible. Mine was. The only problem I had was I used dual monitors. They had me unplug my one monitor, so I couldn't use 2 of them. I had to use 1, and I had to enable pop-up blocker. And that's the only 2 things that I kind of ran into on my computer. They'll wait for you to do it. They'll wait for you to unhook it, click on OK, and they'll see that you only have the 1 single monitor that's available. It will tell you if there's any applications running. You would have to close those, which I had everything shut down, so that wasn't an issue. They have you test your audio. They have you test your video, because the tester has to see your face. They're watching you as you're looking and reading the questions. What they're looking for are things like if you're looking off somewhere, reaching for a document to search for or whatever, they're making sure you're focused straight on the questions itself. You can't even, and I have a bad habit of this, saying the question out loud or saying the question, reading it with your lips. You can't even do that. So that was an issue in that capacity. Another thing, a challenge, biggest challenge for me, I don't have any kids here, so that wasn't a challenge, but I have a cat. And the cat tends to come knocking on the door with her loud noise and so forth. So I had to make sure that the cat was put someplace where she could whine all she wants, but nobody hears her. And so that was something I was a little concerned about, is if that cat would have come up within the 90 minutes, and then they would have had me stop the test and then restart it all over again. And that's one thing I did not want to do in that capacity. So going to the exam at home, I created my TIA account. I ensured my room that I used, which is the one I'm in now, was cleaned up. Everything. I mean, I took out all the knickknacks and everything. The only thing I didn't take off was, or take down, was the pictures on the wall. I turned our home computer backwards and had to show them that. I had to take 4 corner pictures of the room that I was using, behind the computer, to the left, to the right of the computer, and behind me. So the person, the test evaluator, can make sure that there was nothing in my room at that point in time. Plus, I had to log in 30 minutes prior to the test to make sure that the connection was there, testing was available. I reran the test again on the computer, and then I was able to take the exam. The exam scoring, basically, while you're doing the test itself, like I said, they're monitoring you. So again, he never stopped the test at all, which I was kind of surprised because I did feel like I mouthed one or two questions during the test. So maybe he wasn't paying attention. Maybe I caught off on that or whatever it may be. So I didn't have any of those testing policy issues come up. I did have to provide a photograph of myself. I had to provide 2 photograph devices. I gave him my my passport, as well as my driver's license, as well as my military ID, and let them pick and choose which of the 2 they wanted to use in that capacity. Then from here, I signed the agreement. That's what they give you. And then I went ahead and ran through the test. They give you the test advice, what I just showed you. They view my ID. I had to scan it, send it to it, post it up or load it up, and so they can see it. They verified it. And then I ran the test. The cost came out of my pocket at the time. It was $370. I looked again and it was $381 in January. So I don't know what it is. It has gone up, but this is good as far as the voucher for 1 year. So even though I bought it through CompTIA, I didn't have to take the test at Pearson until up to a year from that point before I had to repay again. So I wanted to get it done as quick as possible for this contract. And so I ended up taking it on the 29th of December at 1:30. Took me about an hour and a half as what they give you, and I was successful in passing it. And I don't care, anything over 750 is an overkill, and I scored 784. So I was happy with just getting the certification, because the fact is, with that, I could now join on this other contract. Okay. These are just some of the things I already addressed. What I had to also do was, after I took the test, I downloaded the certificate and it did not have my information on it. So then I had to call CompTIA with the ticket, and then they had to do something on my profile to allow me to download my own certification. So this is the certification I now have to show that I am Security Plus and I am good for 3 years from this date. Any questions?
Just a comment, Lenny, this is Chris Fleming. Yeah, we have to have those at work, where I work also. My advice is to continually update your profile with any CEs you do. They take like cyber awareness training, and it adds to it so that if you get enough CEs, you don't have to take that test again. They'll renew you again for 3 years when your time's up. You meet all their criteria.
So in other words, when you're in with the government, they do give you a lot of training classes that are offered. And I had to do that. I had to do a CE test not too long ago to satisfy. And one of the things they said was, if you are a ARS 7.6.4 admin certified or 8.1 certified, you were good to go. Well, I haven't had those certifications since I left BMC back in 2007. And so I went in and took one of those little tests, and I do plan on taking more of those. Thanks, Chris, for that.
They offer at CompTIA also. They have some CEs that you can take. Some of them are free, some of them you got to pay a little money, but it's well worth keeping that certificate up to date. And as you just said, it's not the most easiest test in the world.
That's true. And there is another test, I can't remember the name of it, that you could also take in place of the Security Plus. And it is a lot difficult, a lot more difficult and challenging. But I was told that if you take this and pass it, then it's good for 10 years. So you wouldn't have to recert after 10 years.
Yeah, they call that a CASP. CASP.
So that's something I'm looking into doing once the dust settles down with all I'm doing right now. Okay. Bob, any other questions? Or
so looking in the chat, Lenny, most of the questions were around who in the DoD space needs to actually be concerned about getting the Security Plus, and we had some folks try to answer those. I think we got those covered. Matt said, based on what he's hearing you say here, is the recommendation is to skip the scenario type questions answer all the real questions and then go back to the scenarios.
Right, and you could do that because once you're done, it does give you. I like I love the software program. It shows you all the questions you've answered and all the ones you haven't done if you skipped one or whatever, and even allows you to flag ones to go back. So you could flag those and then go back to it, just making sure you answer all the 75 questions.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah. Hey, Lenny, this is Phil. I think you said 10 years. From my understanding, I believe the my Security Plus is only good for, I think it's 2 years or 3 years, but I don't believe in any case it was ever 10 years. And
No,
by
it
the
is.
way,
It is 3. It is 3 for the one that I mentioned, but there's a CASP that Chris identified that if you take it, it's 10 years.
oh, right, sorry, I missed that. And to answer Rachel's question, I think even the PMs that weren't actually had any access to the computers, they actually had to have the Security Plus on most of the contracts I've ever been on for the Navy or Pentagon and things. So yeah, even if you're not actually touching the computer, it looked like you had to have a Security Plus at a minimum.
This is Aaron. I can detail this a little better. So there are different levels of IA certifications that you have to have. So there's an IA technical role, and then there are 3 levels in there. And it depends on what level your PD or PWS has you outlined for on the contract as to what certification you have to take. Then there's also an IA management role that has 3 levels. There's an IA system architecture and engineering that has 3 levels, and each one of these have different certifications. Each of those certifications have different expiration dates to them. And then there's also a cybersecurity service provider role. So that has like the CSSP analyst, infrastructure support, incident responder, auditor, and manager levels underneath it. And those all have different certifications as well. So it ranges anywhere from like an IAT level 1 would need to take a CompTIA's A+, all the way to a CSSP manager would need like their CCISO certification.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, I knew we had people on here that had better terminology than I do. My wife works on the DoD side. I haven't been on the DoD for over 11 years now. I've been on the NASA side for 11 years, so treated a little different over here. So if there are no other questions for Lenny, I want to. There is David. Yeah, go ahead, David. Sorry.
I didn't want to interrupt you guys. That's all I wanted to wait. First off, thank you, Lenny. Great information. I really appreciate that. I've got my heads down in the books and doing a few things as well. So I really particularly appreciate this information at this point in time. Just a couple of questions here. What were probably the top 2 or the top 3 most complex pieces that you noticed or that seemed to be the most elaborate or involved during that particular testing? And then second of all, it almost sounds like in person is a lot less painful or grilling, I should say, than doing it online.
Well, I can't really attest the second one. I'll answer the second one first. I can't really attest how it would be if you actually took the test at the facility, because I know you have to go to the facility. You have to lock up your phone in a locker and everything else. You can't have anything in your pockets for the most part. It's kind of like doing it. They have everything cleaned up for you. I didn't have to travel anywhere, so that was an advantage. I just had to make sure everything was cleared out and so forth. And my office really doesn't have a lot of stuff in here, so it's not that it wasn't a bedroom or anything. It's really an office area. So I just wanted to make sure no papers at all were floating around. And so it is, I guess, both sides has its advantages and disadvantages in that capacity. You're using their machine, so it's already set up, where I used mine. I didn't have any issues. They didn't lock me out of anything, but they could really tell if you were doing a Google search on something else. So I found, to me, it was beneficial for me to do it online than it was to try to travel 2 hours and take the test. And then, especially in December, with the way the weather is here, I didn't want to take that chance. As far as the top 2 complex areas, the first one, of course, was I'm not a network guy. I just didn't quite understand the whole performance aspect of what they were looking for. And when they started getting to what would be the firewall for this, the IP address for this, and the port for this piece, that kind of threw me for a loop, because I know some of the features for Remedy, but not all the features for the network and the cloud in particular. That had nothing to do with Remedy in that perspective. So that was my biggest challenge there. But the questions itself, they weren't that difficult. Can't really point out any particular area that was a challenge, because I was familiar with just about everything they were asking on that. It was just performance ones that got me into a loop. There were a couple of questions even on performance related, as far as what would be the correct firewall setting or the correct setting on the network side. That was a challenge. So
a lot of questions on port relationship, do you know? Or
I recall about 3 questions.
not too many then.
Yeah, there's not too many of them. But again, I mean, I passed it, so it couldn't have been too many to throw me that much of a loop. But yeah, there were a few on those.
Yeah, I'm seeing so far there's a lot of acronyms that are just being thrown out constantly. and like MAC as an example, depending upon the context of the conversation or the question, MAC can mean something completely different than MAC on another situation.
I didn't see anything on. I was concerned about that too, because there was like, God, there's a ton. They even have it in one of the documents about 5. It seemed like 500, but there's probably about 100 different acronyms that you'd have to memorize. I'm like, how am I going to recognize these? And there wasn't too many questions that had acronyms in it. They basically broke out everything. I don't recall a lot of acronyms on the questions. I'm not saying that that's not going to be possible, but I don't remember seeing it out of any context that I wasn't familiar with.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Very important information. Appreciate your time.
Hey, David. Yeah, this is Phil. I had to take it on in person, at the Pearson View Center. And so, I mean, this is Texas, right? I mean, we wear cowboy boots, and the guy actually had me take my boots off and felt my socks like I was going through TSA, obviously, and then go in there, right? So
goodness gracious,
it's just FYI. And I want to give a shout out to Stan Feinstein. I got my security clearance many years ago, and then when I was looking for some other work, Stan offered to house my clearance as the FSO. So he's made that offer in the chat, by the way. So if anyone is interested, it doesn't have a sponsor. Stan's a great person, and again, he was very generous and offered to house my clearance for that. So big shout out to Stan Feinstein. Back to you.
JK just posted there are some practice exams on CompTIA security. That's why 601 course. You can go to udemy.com to get it.
Could you put that in the chat, by the way, just so we can get it?
It's in the chat. Yeah,
it's in the chat. JK, is that free, or is it?
Thank you.
Do you have to pay? I don't think you have your audio.
I've taken some Udemy classes, and they're typically there's a fee for them, but it's not a whole lot.
Okay.
Yeah, and one last thing, guys, like they were talking about the CE units. Once you pass CompTIA, it's $50 a year that you want to pay them, and then you have to get the 50 points a year, 50 points total within 3 years, because the cert does run out for Security Plus every 3 years. But if you keep paying them the $50 a year and taking the CE units of 50 points, and a CE unit could be, for example, I took the ITSM professional 19.x course, and that gave me 40 points right there. So those are the types of things you want to do once you get your Security Plus certification, and just keep it going. Because if you don't do that in the 3 years, you got to retake the exam. Just FYI.
There's also a review exam that you can take. It's about $200 that will also renew your certification, and you can take those sections of the exams as many times as you want to, as long as you pass everything and make sure it's uploaded before your expiration date.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great info.
There's a lot of information in the chat. People have provided suggestions, recommendations. Caddy said that it's recommend take all the practice exams and study all the questions as much as you can. You can go on YouTube videos and see some there. JK said it's $14.99 for the practical test on udemy.com. It's well worth the money if you're really wanting to need to get the Security Plus. I could have gotten the contractor or the partner that was going to hire me on to pay for it, but I wanted to keep the cert with me no matter where I went. So I went ahead and forked out the money. So, but yeah, it was a challenge, but I was glad I had the time to do it, but it ruined my holiday, of course.
I found one that was for free on YouTube, by the way. Just put it in the chat for you guys.
All right, thanks, David.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay, back to you, Mr. Bob.